Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second flow of the Han Nefkens Foundation. Today, I'm very pleased to talk with Korakrit Arunanondchai. We've been working with Krit on this latest video, Songs for Dying, and it's a co-production with the Guangzhou Biennale, where the video will be shown tomorrow, I just learned, and Kunsthal Trondheim, where it will be shown until the 18th of April. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what this idea of co-production really entails, because it sounds a little bit technical, but it is really, it's an experience. We've been following Krit for several years now, and the Han Nefkens Foundation produces videos with artists, emerging artists or mid-career artists, but always in collaboration with an art institution, because it's very important for us that the work will be shown in a place. So we've been following Krit, and we asked him if he was working with a venue on a new work, and he mentioned the video he was working on, Songs for Dying. And we were very happy to be able to collaborate in that sense. And the whole process of co-producing is so exciting because first you hear about the idea, you read about it. Then some parts of what the artist is filming is shown, so you can follow it as well. And until eventually the work is finished. So I always like to think of the foundation in that sense, a bit like a midwife. In this case, there were 3 midwives, but it was a collaboration between all of us. And I was so delighted to see the work. It is multi-layered. It touches on so many things. It touches on the personal for Krit, the death of his beloved grandfather, and it's almost an homage to his grandfather. It touches on spiritual, even the animistic side. It touches on technology. It touches on political aspects. It touches on history. And then Krit knows how to bring it all together, how everything connects, which is a real eye-opener. One of the most important things of the video for me is this feeling of connection and this feeling of collaboration. So, Krit, I wanted to ask you, when you start collaborating with all these people and even with all these different philosophies and these different aspects of life, what are you looking for?
Well, in short, I would say that this project that I've been working on for, I guess, like this one big video series that I've been working on for the past almost 11, 12 years now has, it's my entire practice, and it's essentially like a cloud of ideas, that kind of keep adding to itself. And I think when you touch upon the idea of collaboration and relationships, maybe the cloud, this cloud itself, is, like it's almost as if my practice in itself, I think is a kind of container to contain sort of like relationships, which in fact in itself is formlessness, and cannot really be captured within like one media or one language, or in a way even one container, right? And within it there is, I think, if there was like the most important, let's say, ingredient or matter within the work, it's definitely the idea of time, time and change. And time, I feel like, to me, whether it's like, my interest in time-based media, or whether my interest in the idea of like medium, both in general medium within like the artistic sense, like different mediums, and both in Songs for Dying, which I started the research by looking into actual like spirit mediums, or like they're like container for things that may, containers for beliefs, containers for spirits, container for, formlessness, things are unrepresentable, feelings, history, past, grief, relationships. I think the work is like, in a way, like it's about that. It's about mediums, and it's about like containing time. That which is so immaterial in a way. And I guess, yeah, I think a lot about, there these subjects that I formed relationships with, for example, my grandfather, or different places, or let's say like the past political history of Thailand and the present one, or like I generally kind of sort of have some foot in the past and some foot in the present, and some foot sort of like both in the like the personal, the global, the zeitgeist. But I think at the end it's to sort of make this kind of like like multi-dimensional relationship to time itself. And it if that makes sense. It's kind of like, yeah, like it's about a lot of things, but at the end of the day it's sort of like all these different relationships I have, like, and like the all these collaboration. It's just to kind of maybe show the materiality of time against maybe like what it is to be human or something, in a way.
Yeah. So basically, you touch upon everything, and time, of course, is such an important part. But in the video, you also mentioned that in a sense we are all, and everything is a ball of energy waiting to find a form. You can also say that your work is a little bit like that. Before it's there's this ball of energy, and then you yourself make it into a form.
Yeah, definitely. I think like I've heard some artists, say things, and also like, let's say Buddha, like I've heard Damien Hirst say things like artworks about life and death, or Buddha also kind of like contemplating on death and stuff. And I think for me, a lot of like bodies of knowledge that I look at these kind of, in a way, binary, right? But I think for me, I mean, it's like I want to look at the in between, and like basically living. Like this video is called "Songs for Dying," and but it's actually it's almost like it's not precisely about the moment of death, but it's what that moment is opening up into. It's almost like the work in itself is a wedge that tries to open like the idea of this point that you call death into this space where you can kind of like see and learn, and like redefine different relationships, right? And take parts that, like literally in this video, we think about ghosts almost as a mushroom, as a fungi that like digests things so that it could turn itself into other things, and I think this to kind of expand, to make more meaning out of this sort of point that may seem like a void or an end, to see it more as this, like, yeah, essentially a wedge is a good I think metaphor for what, and I think the in between, I used to think a lot when I was feel like much less developed, like 10-11 years ago. I feel like the metaphor that I was really working with a lot was this idea of the in between. Back when I used to even think that my practice was something about the space between the East and the West, or technology and spirituality, and carving this in between space. But I think the idea of the in between is, it's not just like a line between 2 points, but it's like multi-dimensionality. And that's why I think in terms of the magnitude and the scale shift, and also the kind of register of the multi-register ness of the materials that I choose to engage with, like I think like to kind of see the personal, but suddenly switch to the non-human, switch to the kind of like religion, switch to the kind of like sort of it like it shifts to these different scales where you're like as small as like an abstract as this ball of energy, and then suddenly you go, and you switch to like a protest, and then you switch to something in the past, and you switch to something more abstract, and then the fiction, and then the very real or something, that's almost like non-fiction, non-metaphorical anymore. And I think these different shifts, but being able to kind of take you in between them it's kind of like the magnitude of what it feels to like be a person in general. But oftentimes we need poetry, we need visual, we need aesthetic, we need like these other language, to kind of just get us there. Because I think like life today, or life maybe in general, just involves so much like compartmentalization of knowledge, of understanding, of experience, and I think maybe at least, yeah.
I think that's a very interesting point, this in-between, as you say, this compartmentalization that we all live in, right? I even felt when I introduced you the Thai artist, and I said, so what? What does it mean to be a Thai artist? How is that? What does that say about you? And I often feel a little bit the same about myself when they say the Dutch writer living in Barcelona. Dutch, compartmentalizing everything and almost like putting a stamp on you, and almost forced identity, and going away from that and discovering and exploring this in between gives a sense of freedom, as it were. There may not be the boundaries that we are used to. There may not be the boxes that we put things into, so they are all very clear and understandable to us. It's much more free floating, and as you say, it's going so many different directions, and that gives a sense of freedom. And I realized that that's something that we're not so used to. It's quite unusual for us to look at a work of art without thinking of a very strict narrative, right? A beginning, a middle, and an end. So where are we going? We're going from point A to point B, right? Well, in your work, we're not only going from point A to point B, but we're going from point A to point Z and back again, and again and again. And even the rhythm of the video shows that, because there's some parts that are floating very slowly, and then all of a sudden there's this staccato, very quick images of sometimes of violence, things that happened in history, and then we go back again, and then we're in the water, and we're ghosts, and we're with your grandfather, and then once again the rhythm is back. It's almost as though the rhythm of the video is its own music, it's its own pace, and it reinforces this idea of in between. It is not something that we're used to. It's not something that is clear cut so we can consume it right away. I feel that with your video, it's not a work to consume, it's a work to experience, to become part of and go with it. Is that what you have in mind as well?
I mean, it's yeah. I guess it's hard to be so outside of it and plan what the audience will, how you can put so. I guess you put as work into it, hoping that it would do something, but it's hard to exactly plan.
Let me tell you, I've seen it now several times, and I experience it in a different way each time. The first time, of course, it's curiosity. What is this going to be? What is it? The second time, there is, I know it a little bit, so there's a certain point of recognition, but then I discover other parts that I hadn't seen before. Sometimes I may look more at the images and not as much at the text, and I sort of put it all together. So I would really say this is a video that you can see 1,000 times, and every time.
Oh, that's really great to hear.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not going to commit myself to seeing it 1,000
okay.
times, but every time you take something else from it, it's wonderful work.
I think the process of how it's made, it's, you know, it's a video, but I think it's made in a way that's very, you know, we come with making an artwork in our own metaphors, you know. And I think, you know, you like, let's say like a lot of painters will think they're like a chef or pastry chef, or, you know, you come up with these kind of abstract ways to see yourself that you can perform like a certain task. And I think for me, actually, yeah, and usually for many artists there's multiple, you know what I mean. And I think the I'm a very distracted person, and I think when I make a video, it's a lot, such a long process that I'm able to play so many different roles throughout. You know, like sometimes I'm the producer, sometimes I like, you know, sometimes I go on a site and I think I'm Werner Herzog. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'm just trying, but kind of performing my version of what I think like that kind of like that space is, and how I arrive at the material. And then there's this whole process of the writing, the editing, the composing, the music, and especially with this video where the plot that I, you know, that I knew from the beginning was gonna, you know, taken from the experience of my grandfather, and singing songs to him as he was passing away. And I knew that this video it's gonna be lyrical. It's gonna be almost like, you know, this slow process that deconstructs time into this emotional space of these songs that basically take you to probably the space of dying, right? And you know, and I had also, and there was this text, there was this whole experience where I went to do this Buddhist retreat workshop, that we, you know, we got to do this meditation that's like recreation of death. But what was very special that I really about this very special Buddhist is this foundation called Pattaya in northern Thailand. But actually, the interesting thing was it wasn't just like a silent retreat. Half of it was talking, and one of the monks that came was actually like had once been jailed as a political dissident. You know, he was like a very similar moment to a moment right now that's happening on the streets in Thailand with the youth movement is happened once before, you know, like to try to get like a military dictator out in Thailand. And he was one of the leaders of the movement. And then he, you know, he got jailed, and then he later became a monk, you know. So so the kind of the space we're in this Buddhist retreat dilate between discourse, like how to find like a link between Buddhism, you know, and sort of like his past experience, and that as like an analogy to learn what that space is, and then learn and talk about what is happening now. And that's why it's, you know, to kind of take, yeah, and I think that's why it was like it was quite interesting. But to go back to what you were talking about, I think I'm very conscious that video, you know, there's something very special about how video art, in most of the context it's shown in, doesn't have a beginning or end. Most times you go to a museum and you walk in, and whichever point you walk in and see that piece, you start watching it. You know, I'm very conscious that half an hour is probably the longest, you know, you can subject someone, for me at least, in the language that I use to like a time-based media, and that they will, you know, and that as soon as it ends, it will begin again in less than a second after, you know. And I think from the minute, from my first video up until now, I'm so conscious as a viewer myself of this experience. And every time I do a piece, I think like that's already the given context, right? And within that, like within this medium, talking about like from the beginning, the metaphors of like death, purgatory, rebirth, you know, and the cycle, you know, like I feel like it's such a beautiful kind of thing where, wow, the platform, you know, like the platform where this work will be shown will function like that too, where it really doesn't end, you know, it kind of just loops.
And
Like
that's
you know?
very true.
And that's
And
really and I think also, so the ways in which the work is made, and within this I try to divide into these chapters of songs, and but at the end of the day, I think that that consciousness of that the medium, I think that's almost like showing video in a museum, in any art context. That's that very like the medium specificity of of video art. It's very strong, is that it's always looping, and yeah.
But the fact that you're able to do that means that you give yourself a certain amount of freedom, because there are also a lot of artists who said, well, okay, I have to tell my story. So this is where it begins and this is where it ends. For some video works, it's very important to see the whole video to understand what's going on. But you allow yourself, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, this freedom of, it's again in betweenness, really, right? Of there not being a very fixed beginning and a very fixed end, but at the same time, you do have something to say. And even if you look at your video for a couple of minutes, understand what you're saying. So it's always there. You talked about all the things you did in order to prepare for the video, and it must have taken you quite a while to make it as well. So that in itself becomes quite an experience for you then. What did you take away from that?
I just want to throw in the word storytelling a little bit. I think that's I think the idea of being a storyteller, as opposed to, let's say, like a painter. There's different forms of what you do within your art, right? And but I think for me, like, I use this medium to storytell, even if it doesn't have a real beginning and like storytelling in a loop or whatever. I think at the end, like there is a story there, right? You watch a video and it's like there is a kind of it takes you through a story, and I think that's something that I actually, in the next video, I'm gonna work on songs for a living. I'm hoping to see if I can do a different video that's not actually like just like me as a storyteller, and because I think it'd be interesting to challenge myself and the ways in which I use the medium a little bit too. But in terms of, did you ask what I'm taking away from it?
Yeah, I was. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it sounds, it's more.
I mean, you go in it with some ideas of what you want to develop, what you want to investigate, what you want to see, and then talking about a story that's also your story, the making of it.
I think for better or worse, my art practice is completely tied to me as a human being to the core, and if anything, it performs perhaps in a way my ideological self, at least, like it's not fully who I am, but it like I think I'm what is performed in my art is and all the activities involved in the process, in the making, in its failures, and in all the facet of it, like gives me like vitality, and it also gives me like all the curiosities that I have as a human being, like all the things that I feel like are at stake. Maybe not all, but a lot of it, like I can kind of see it's responded to me within the practice. I think you started talking about collaboration, and I just wanted to say something really important, which was like, I never have, in the beginning when you have to write a proposal, and for me, when you, let's say, to see like if the project will be funded or not, or just even to start the process, and it's always very difficult for me because I almost don't want to define what I'm doing, because I want to allow change to happen. I want, in a way, I'm a medium, and I want to go in, being able to change being able to see it emerge, you know, it's like it's almost like all the words, all the sentences and the ideas that you see in the video, they're now they're part of me, right? Now that I've been a medium and had kind of spoken those, like literally like a spirit medium, and has spoken and processed these words from like different books I read, different people, like the monks or the text I was reading, like now they're a part of me. But originally they weren't, you know? And and I think it's like to the point where, like, you know, like you asked me, I think in an email once, how did I gravitate towards the Jeju massacre? And I actually I think I think with the nature of how I research, I also respond a lot to the opportunities and the collaborators that pull me in, you know, like when people, like I think, like let's say when I do the Dhaka Art Summit and they brought me to Dhaka, that changed a lot of what I wanted to do with the piece. And then when the Gwangju Biennale brought me to Korea and talked to a shaman specialist, you know, like I was already interested in spirit medium and animism, but I think like my practice is very porous in a way, and you know, depending on different people that I work with or the different institutions pulling me in, you know, to merge. I think that's like very important, that I'm just not like I don't exist as a singular artist that just kind of like that I changed and the work changed very heavily as the context and the literal like institution or places like that invite me to work with them, you know? And I think it's, you know, it's not a collaborate. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense, and it's something that we experience as well. Because you say that after making the work, it becomes part of you. Well, the same can be said about us, the viewer. It becomes part of us as well. But I find it very, again, it's the vitality. You know, it's very different from having a script, as it were, and executing the script. It is a process, an ongoing process. And I'm sure that you could actually continue working on this for years and years and years to come.
Well, I think there's always I think the energy of you know, sometimes within the metaphor in the work, sometimes now then I become the ghost that then process this work, the mushroom that process this work and grow another work out of this, you know? So I think, you know, one interesting experience I have, like, I don't have a lot of opportunities sometimes but when I get to actually exhibit all my videos and you know, like it keeps going, and actually, but sometimes in this rare moment when I get to kind of show all of them, or even for me as an audience have the enough patience to see all of them back to back, it does string together in a way, you know? And I think, yeah, I think, I don't know if it's for better or worse, I really felt like I've just been working on one big project, you know? And many times I almost feel like I try to get away from it. It's almost like there are times when I resist not, you know, not adding to the top, or not taking what was there to like start anew. But I think
why would you want to get away from it?
I don't. It's just an idea, you know. Just as an artist, you always imagine change. You always imagine that like maybe radicality exists within like being able to like change or surprise yourself, you know, even in the structural level. But also, I don't know, I feel heavily changed and surprised also going through this process of making Song for Dying. You know, there were moments where I felt like I had to, you know, not only just really not just processing my grandfather's death, but more than that, you know, I had to kind of, yeah, there were definitely lots of like moments that I felt were like, yeah, both, there were moments that were both real as a person, and there were also more like artistic, formal, technical moments when I also could, you know, as you know, not an emotional one, but a kind of more, I don't know, for, you know, making video is actually very formal and technical in ways. Do you know what I mean?
But
I
then
think,
you can have the change, as you talk about the radical change. You could even have that in the same work.
yeah,
You don't necessarily have to take a certain distance and start doing something completely different.
yeah,
Because if you develop, you end up perhaps doing something very different. It sort
yeah,
of becomes a flow, as it were.
yeah. One of the radical change, actually, in the most practical way, is almost in this work, is actually the fact that, I'm displaced from New York, where I usually pull everything together and work with my team. And now, I had to do this entire work with a whole new group of people. I had to shoot the part in Korea, like remotely with someone I've never worked with before, so materially, everything changed, in a way, and then on top of that, the exhibition, the final body that this work takes, both in Trondheim and Gwangju, were done from, me just verbally
But
communicating.
your work is a great example of how we can continue even during COVID.
That's good to hear. Like,
I think
but yeah,
it might have to do with your flexibility as well.
I guess so. I mean, um yeah, I mean, I guess you have to be flexible in this day and age. Yeah. I guess so. I guess the container, yeah, I think time-based media and video, I for me, I find to be a very flexible container. And I think I started as a a painter, and I still paint, and actually 12 years ago, when I kind of started focusing more on video, I felt like I carried my desire as like what I wanted to do in painting, and the freedom that I thought I would have within painting. Actually, for me, I found it in this process, which now became my video writing, editing skill. I really feel, and one thing that's the most, I guess, important thing that I feel that I have in video is in time-based media is actually time. That it allows time to feel, at least in the framework of the work of working in that space, like flexible, malleable, whereas in painting, sometimes I often feel like, there's like drying time, there's like clearly the past that you cannot go back and edit in the process. There's, where I feel like within this medium of painting, I felt so strained by time, and I almost felt like it's a harder, at least for what I was going for, like harder to in a way access and use time as a medium. It's a very different thing. Whereas the way that I wanted to kind of dematerialize time and work with it, that I could do, and that now the more time, especially for Songs of Dying, that where I had archive footage from 10 years ago, and that I've had, and I just feel like somehow this thing that seems like it should be more limited with time, it actually gives so much more freedom to play with time in a way.
Yes, and also again, it marks the rhythm of the video as well.
Yeah.
Time becomes an element of a very active element of the video. Not only the length of it, but the pace of it as well.
Yeah.
So one more question. We all know about the limitations of the time we're living in, the pandemic. So there were probably things that you weren't able to do. But looking back at it now, do you also think these limitations have brought you something surprising that you didn't expect?
I think so. Yeah, I think like I mentioned, that was like the surprise in having to in a way start like find new collaborators, work with the old ones remotely, and I think in a way, being in Thailand, I also feel somewhat a sense of I'm closer to my family, but as an artist, I feel more isolated from my peers. And there's all these, like there is a shift, like like everyone in, I think there is a shift, but I think everyone, like, you know, everyone is experiencing this shift like differently, but in a way like it affects everyone. It's this big thing that's happening together, and I think you do feel it in the work too. You know, I think the work definitely contains that shift, you know, both metaphorically, both in an energetic sense, but also within just, if you see it in comparison to the other works that I've made before, you know, and I think that that energetic shift is, I think it's good. I mean, that's also another way of containing time, right? That we live in definitely like a kind of break in time. And
I think everybody got very much conscious of the time factor during COVID, of course. The fact that
and I think
we had to stay indoors, or limits that we had. And I also heard a lot of people saying that they experienced time in a different way, that the days seemed to go quicker than before. And people sometimes didn't quite know what day was.
Sorry. I was going to say, even the way that the work was filmed, you know, not just the materiality where people were wearing masks, but the way that it was filmed, like it was heavily, you know, like even I remember like the majority of the filming actually happened in one day, but it had to be out. It was like during when they announced the second lockdown in Thailand, actually, and it had to shift a lot, you know, and actually it had to shift certain ways in which the performers, I had to become the almost like, you know, instead of having 10 performers, we had to cut it down to 2 and had to be one of, you know, so I think all these, but yeah, so I think all these limitations force the work to be a certain way, actually. But I think I think when you hit upon limitations, that's when you actually have to make a decision, you know, and a resolve or something, you know, and I think this not having that like that I think that is a good thing, you know, that allows evolution, change, and
I've experienced that myself as well. Some decisions were taken for us, of course, the fact that we can go out, the fact that we can't travel, so you have to focus on other things, and that's something that might not have happened otherwise. So that's the positive part of it. So Pete, you talked about how you don't want your videos to be longer than half an hour because you know that you can't capture people's attention for that much time. Well, we already overran it by 8 minutes. Even though I could talk with you for hours about so many different aspects, perhaps we can do that another time, because we obviously don't want to take too much time of our viewers. So I'd like to thank you very much for our talk. And it was great seeing you. I hope there'll be a time that we see each other personally. We can continue talking without time restrictions. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for being